Hello all, or whoever's watching now or later. Yeah, it's the last day of the Zelart Scholarship fundraiser, and I was up late last night doing the inappropriate characters stream. So I'm not really up to doing much in the way of work today, but I thought I would stream for a couple of hours. Maybe a bit longer, maybe do some more later tonight, and just yeah, offer people some insight and thoughts and stuff into gaming, small business side of it, the money side of it, all that kind of thing. So while we wait for some people to show up, I know in the day on a Monday isn't exactly the best day, but today is when it runs out. So far we seem to have $460. I'm going to be busy and distracted with various other things. It's just the way it goes. It's a work day. Yeah, so we've got 460 out of a target of 500, which isn't bad. Could be better. And we have 25 hours left, so almost exactly a day. And we also get money from sales, so let's just see how much we got there. From last year. Yeah, if anyone turns up to watch, we can talk about whatever you want. Okay, let's see. I'm hoping I'll get my John Carter of Mars RPG from the Kickstarter today. So if that shows up, I'll nip off. Okay, sales report. From the 1st of January 2018 to 31st December 2018. Stock containing Zel for Zelart, and okay, let's see what we got. Yeah, around $100 from sales over the year. It's not much, but hopefully we'll be able to add more and more. That doesn't seem like it's caught all the sales on the search though. So let's try running that again. Okay, that looks more like it. Okay, so yeah, just over $100 on top of whatever we raised directly. So yeah, that's something. Yeah, we can talk about whatever you want, but primarily, I mean, if you've got any problems with your home games, or you're getting into game design, or you want to know any of the dirty secrets of the RPG industry, how the sausage is made, or whatever, fire away in the chat. Say something. Talk to me. Otherwise, I'm just going to be blathering. What else can I talk about? I've got a new sales site up. Been banging on about that for a couple of days now. It's post-mort.com. So you can find all my stuff there because it's direct sales. You know, I get more of it there, and it links off directly to places for print on demand like Lulu or the Game Crafter, apparel stores like Teespring and so on. I hope to add sections for like secondhand goods and some physical products and things later on, but for the time being, it's all, you know, PDF digital downloads and things. So you can go check that out. There you go. Talkative bunch, ain't ya? Am I missing anything? Yes. It looks like it's buffering and stuff. Not my fault, promise. Internet connection's fine today. Shall I reach into my library of games and talk about something? I've been doing the Know Your Role stuff on the channel for a bit. What have we got that's interesting? Let's have a look. Oh, I talked about those already. Earthdawn, 3rd edition. Always meant to play Earthdawn. I like the idea of the setting and everything. Never got around to it. These have been sat on my shelves since a Mongoose sale, back when they were printing it and distributing it. So I don't know that I can actually talk about these particularly. But yeah, this was the one that was originally kind of pitched as a kind of prequel to Shadowrun of the previous heroic fantastical age. The things that really stood out about the game, apart from its links to Shadowrun, which were de-emphasized later on, were two things. It kind of inverted the old sort of relationship that fantasy games had with dungeons. In this case, they were like apocalyptic shelters from mythos-like horrors. So the heroes and so on were people either emerging from or previously emerged from these kind of shelters. It's almost like fantasy Fallout in a lot of ways. And it was the world outside, it was the wilderness and everything that was unexplored and not understood and full of monsters and everything, which was a really interesting way to go about it as an inverted approach. And the other really interesting thing was the way it linked story to your characters, like your heroic deeds and things. These were some of the things that gave you power, stories about you, you know, tales of daring do and so on. That's something I'd like to see picked up in other games, but yeah, that's what stands out about those. But I haven't really read them, so I can't talk about the system too much. I never liked Shadowrun's system, but I'm not sure how much similarity remained by 3rd edition. New. I want to talk about the quality of TTRPG moving away from mechanics and towards narrative, and that you feel it's causing them to decline rapidly. There's always been a wide variety of mechanical kind of the mathematics, the technology that drives the games, and there's always been some degree of divide between mechanically oriented crunch games and fluff oriented narrative games. It was less kind of explicit in the rules, I guess. I mean, from a certain point of view, you could say that original D&D and everything was quite narrative because it didn't have rules for a lot of things. So the GM was forced to improvise a lot of the time and just go with whatever felt right for the story. And then there was always controversy over whether do you fudge or don't you fudge rolls to ensure that there's a better story there or not. You know, so do you fudge the roll to spare the characters, or do you pretend to make the crit or whatever for the monster to make it more terrifying or to avoid it dying out of hand? So there's always been that dynamic, but it's happened more and more, and a lot of mainstream games now include narrative mechanics or focus. I mean, the advantage-disadvantage mechanic in 5th Ed D&D, the backgrounds and so on, it's definitely moved away from the much more crunchy 3rd edition with all the stuff that went with that. 4th edition, it had a lot of rules, but it was more like an MMORPG. I think the real kind of narrative thrust probably came in the 90s with Vampire and so on. And Vampire's not that fluffy a game. It's just the range of success and failure is fairly compressed, and the dice pools is something physical, so you can feel that there. But in terms of how they presented the game, how they talked about it, that was massively narratively focused, even if the mechanics didn't necessarily back that up. But kind of the LARP scene, I think, gave people a desire to see more quick and easy narrative type games, and then obviously Fate took off and was a big success later on, and so on. I don't think it's negative, I just think it's different. I don't think it's causing a decline exactly, because the maths and the note taking and all that used to put people off quite a bit. That was probably the main barrier I had to getting new people to join role-playing groups, whereas with a more narrative and story-driven focus, that's easier for people to get a hook into, I think. But it swings and roundabouts, really. I don't think it's bad or good. I think it makes them more accessible, but it definitely doesn't really kind of scratch an itch that a lot of people have for mechanics and optimizing their characters. That sort of thing. You can take a very narrative focused game like Over the Edge, and that's, when was that published? '92. Okay, so that was a very influential narrative game. But then you can also look at something like it's not handy, but like Call of Cthulhu or whatever. Fairly crunchy percentile based rule set, but percentile chances are quite easy for people to grasp, and then mechanics like sanity and so on drive the narrative, so there's that. I'm noticing a lot of groups recently that they're practically eschewing the mechanics of the game in order to get the result they want. Yeah, that's always happened, like I said, with the fudging rolls and so on. But I think what's weird is it's not the people really playing the heavily narrative games that are creating this atmosphere. I think it's the streamers who are much more fixated and focused upon producing a good story and a performance for people to watch or whatever. I think they're bending things in a way that a lot of older school gamers probably wouldn't, in order to get that kind of result. I mean, you can look at the backlash on some of these big streams when a beloved character gets killed or whatever. A lot of older school gamers would just kind of brush that off. Yeah, it happens. It's part of the game. That's the stakes. You know? Certainly from a production point of view, narrative mechanics are easier, I think. Genre emulation, trying to create the feel of a film or a book or a style of film or a style of book, whatever, is easier with narrative mechanics. Because they don't have to model reality directly, and they leave a lot in the hands of excuse me, of the games master, which can be a good thing, you know, with an experienced person. Let's check if my mute button works. This is what I get for streaming after a late night streaming. I mean, is that what you meant? The kind of bending the mechanics, the fiddling around and bodging the rolls this way and that? I mean, Vampire formalised it, but really only in the instructions that it gave games masters. And you couldn't have had Vampire if you hadn't had Cyberpunk, and you couldn't have had Cyberpunk if you hadn't had Call of Cthulhu. So there's a kind of evolutionary chain of games and narrative mechanics and so on all the way through. But people have always hedged and bodged and given people rerolls and so on. The old school Renaissance represents a big pushback to that, and it's very successful. I mean, even with the release of 5th Ed D&D, I think James Raggi was saying, even with all that, he's got the highest level of sales of his products for the old school that he's ever had. It's gone up something like 20% since the release of 5th Ed. But then I think D&D is such a flagship product that when it does well, everyone else, you know, picks up a bit. Even though it is hard to get diehard D&D players to do it. But I don't know that there was an original spirit in the way that you mean, and in the way that the OSR really talks about. I think it was more of an improvisational kind of punk rock thing, you know, here's 3 dice, now make a game sort of thing. People making up and interpreting their own rules and deciding what to do, and some people took a more mechanical approach, some people took a more narrative approach. I think there's this idea of the old school that is this kind of vicious, almost dickish Tomb of Horrors, wipe out the party, adversarial GM player dynamic that I never really experienced. Our games used to be harsher. You'd die more often. You'd be in genuine peril more often as your character. But even so, for example, there's a lot of issues with modern gaming groups who are incapable of role-playing anything other than someone from a modern era. That is an issue, and I think that's a big issue. But I think that's reflective of the broader culture rather than something that was bubbled up from within role-playing itself. There does seem to be a lot less understanding that you don't have to play the good guy, and you don't have to play in an idealized world. I mean, it's pretty boring if you do, because conflict drives story, and if everyone gets on and everything's shiny and happy, then it's hard to get an engaging story from that kind of situation. That's why I think Blue Rose didn't do quite as well as it could have done with its enlightened magical deer kingdom and all that. Like there'll be role-playing a game set in the Middle Ages, and everyone has to be that one person ahead of their time who isn't sexist and doesn't believe in God. Well, atheists go back to at least ancient Greece, probably before. The thing is, you'd be burned at the stake for it, so... So it's not like it didn't exist, but yeah, if everyone is acting like some enlightened soul or a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, then yeah, it can kind of break the setting. And in things like pulp settings, you know, sexism, racism, homophobia, these things were endemic in societies at that time. So if you're playing a gumshoe detective game set in the 30s or 40s, or even a more fantastical game set in those times, I think it does a disservice to the people who lived at that time and had to cope with this and overcome it if you don't include those things in your game. I mean, characters are heroes, they are exceptions, they are exceptional, but you've got to retain some of the flavour of the time, and you've got to respect the history, I think. And if you don't, I think you're missing out. I mean, one of the big cool things about role-playing games, other than, you know, wish fulfillment and power fantasies, is thinking about things from another person's situation, another person's perspective, you know, walking a mile in their shoes, so to speak. So I think role-playing can breed empathy and so on, you know, positive things in that way, but not if you only ever play another version of yourself, you know? You have to get another drink with some ice. I mean, there can be a lot of fun in playing the villain, doing horrendous, horrible things, or being someone who believes something that's antithetical to what you believe in. I've had fun playing religious fanatics in some games, and I'm a strident atheist. Is it Eclipse Cast in Exalted, the evil, corrupted ones of the Exalted? We played a game of that, where I played this kind of crippled old necromancer guy who did some really horrendous things to help his side, like setting up breeding camps, because you need live things to turn into dead things to create necromantic monstrosities. So you've got to renew your supply, and you can't always guarantee on winning every battle, and so it can be fun in a dark, nasty sort of way, to play the villain, to be the bad guy, to do that kind of thing. I think people who don't do that are missing out. So Pundit calls it everyone's playing Fantasy Seattle, with his usual flair for hyperbole. But I think he's onto something there. Everyone wants to play these kind of shiny, modern, ethically and morally modern fantasy worlds. So kind of what's the point in a lot of ways? Though I think that raises other implications which are interesting, such as what would a society be like with magic instead of technology? But no one really particularly explores that too in depth, and I've gotten in trouble when I have. so what do I know? More and more I'm noticing people aren't able to do that, almost as if they're afraid to offend one another by even pretending to be someone problematic. Yeah. And you see that for writers too, not even interactive entertainment. An author has a villain who is something that people regard as, particularly egregiously bad, and they seem to forget that it's a villain. It's supposed to be bad, it's supposed to do bad things. I mean, it can be a bit cheap to just have a villain do something to prove his evil credentials. Hello players, I'm going to drop kick this baby into a wood chipper, just so you know that I'm the bad guy, alright? Punt. Yeah, so that can be cheap, if your villain is a child molester or a rapist or whatever else. I mean, it can be cheap, but it can be done well. And that's so subjective. How do you really judge? But yeah, everyone walks on eggshells. You got these X cards that in some conventions have been mandating those. Yeah, those things that, I'm being triggered, please can we change the scene or whatever. I think doing that is much more disruptive to a game than playing something problematic. If everyone is walking on eggshells trying not to offend anyone else or to do anything that might upset anyone else, they forget to have fun a lot of the time, I think. Don't these people ever switch off and just enjoy something problematic? Come on, I see there's more of you watching. I'm going to be on for a few hours, so come on, speak up, ask me shit. I rely on interaction, otherwise it's going to be me flicking through books again. Trying to find ones that I haven't already done. Have I got anything fun handy? I should have got this out last night. We were talking about Munchkins. That was my first real professional foray. And led to the card game and everything else. else have I got down here? Ooh, original softback rifts. Hateful system, interesting setting, very kitchen sink and crazy and over the top and overpowered. And I did pick up the newer edition when I did a conversion to Fate, one of those narrative systems you don't like. But no, it looks like Savage Worlds is picking up on all the Palladium stuff, Robotech and Rifts now. Not sure what I think about that. I like the system as it's applied to Deadlands and Wasted West, but I have had pretty much no success using Savage Worlds for anything else. I picked up the Solomon Kane book that's Savage Worlds based, but I haven't got to play it because I just don't. The Savage World system just doesn't work for me. I don't know why, because it worked fine for us playing Deadlands and so on. The way that it encourages you to play the character flaws and so on, but there's just something unsatisfying whenever we try to play anything else with it, and I don't know what it is. Ooh, another book I worked on, Monster Manual 5. Back in 3.5 days. I think this was at the dog end of that. Did this and a lot of the Eberron sourcebook for City of Stormreach, which is what D&D Online was based on. I essentially got the job because I was one of the very few people that actually played the online game. Now, what did I do in here? I think it was gems, scarabs, and different kinds of ogre mage. I think that's what it was. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, there we go. Gem scarabs. Pretty shiny. Pretty art. It's alright, Nu. If no one else is talking, then knock yourself out. What was the other thing I did in the... I did write some other things, but I didn't use them. There it is. Yeah, the elemental ogre mages, which I thought were pretty cool. Don't know if any of these were ever made into miniatures or anything. They changed some of my description, I think. Yeah, so I did a bit of work here and there for Wizards before I got cast aside. Vanished like an old table. Oh, what else we got? 4th edition. I wrote Cross City Race for one of the last ever issues of Dragon or something, or it may have ended up on the Wizards site in the end. But for winning that, I got a set of the books signed. Why couldn't you have been a good edition? Damn it! There were some interesting things in 4th that were probably blaggable, like extended tests and so on. They weren't too bad. Salvageable. I'd quite like to see those used again. Some Glorantha stuff down there. Ah, Cadwallon. Now that's an oddity. Let's see, Sex Dice and Gamer Chicks, that's the anthology of all the comedy supplements I did for Mongoose, the ones that people hate so much. Because they think rather than it being sophomoric, they thought it was me being abusive rather than making fun of people's attitudes. I think that triggered a lot of people back before triggering was a thing. 4th edition, the combat stuff. Well, I've always preferred Theatre of the Mind, so with it being so utterly tied into the game board, I didn't like that very much at all. But the extended challenges thing, I liked. That was good. And that adventure I wrote was basically just a series of extended challenges to represent the race. But weirdly, we've been enjoying Iron Kingdoms, and that's very board-based. It's almost like playing, War Machine or Hordes as the war games. But that's been okay. I'd still feel a bit put off by using battle maps and figures and so on. It's not what I'm used to. It's not what I prefer when I'm running a game. But it allows the players to think more tactically, and since that's a game in which they're playing a mercenary company, playing more tactically is kind of fitting. But I think once we're done with that, I probably will go back to not using boards quite so much. So speaking of games that are miniatures and battle mats a lot. So Cadwallon was a kind of hybrid tabletop RPG and war game made by Rackham, who've disappeared. So Rackham was a French company that just appeared out of nowhere, really, and got a huge amount of traction in gaming for a while. Just with how beautiful and different their miniatures were, how much emphasis they put on art and design and so on, and then they just kind of vanished almost as quickly as they arrived, unfortunately. So this was something of a curiosity, but it's a kind of orphaned game system, and all the wonderful designs for things that they created, all their different, more interesting spins on dwarves and elves and goblins and all that, it's all kind of gone. I think Fantasy Flight picked up a bunch of it. Again, this is another thing I haven't played. I picked it up as a curiosity more than anything else, and it is very tied to the board and played more as a miniatures game. But I loved their miniatures. I loved their background, their ideas and everything. It suffers a bit from bad translation here and there, and the other material just doesn't really exist anymore, which is a shame. I'll have to give this a try at some point. Maybe make that one of the games I end up streaming. I don't know. I've been on a while, so I'll just remind you, this address down here, that's where you can go to donate to the Zelart Scholarship, raising money to help young or impoverished genre artists get by, get through school, pay the rent for a month, whatever it is to help them out and help them keep making art. I'm looking for entries as well, so if you know any artists who meet those descriptions, you know, at school, college, unemployed, well, whatever else it might be, let them know they can enter. The information should be available there or on my blog, which is linked off there anyway. Yeah, and we're still, I think, $40 short. Something like that. Let me just have a quick look. Yeah, $460 with 19 hours left to go. So we just need another $40. So there's what, 5, 6 of you watching? $7 each, that'd do it. Hopefully other people watching this later will chip in as well. Right, I need another drink to see if the post has come, so I will put you on an ad break for a minute while I do that. Back in a sec.
Postmortem Studios, role-playing games, and a lot more to die for. Post-mort.com. A problem for every games master has always been coming up with adventure ideas. For years now, Postmortem Studios has been helping out with the 100 Adventure Seeds line. These provide adventure ideas for all genres, and you can get them at RPG Now or Lulu.com. At the end of World War II, the Axis and the Allies went to war with A-bombs until nobody was left to fight. In this atomic wasteland, a new breed of rockabilly hero arises. From the gleaming domes of Science City Zero to the sleazy roller derbies of Vegas and the sky fortress of the Fourth Reich, there's a new world for the taking. 45 Psychobilly Retropocalypse, available at Lulu.com and RPG Now. The Atomic Age, with its A-bombs, transistorized radios, jet engines, and a new breed of dangerous supervillain, requires heroes to face the challenge. That's where you come in. The world needs you, Agent. Agent of Swing.
Do you like t-shirts?
Yeah, boy!
Do you like games?
Certainly.
Are you perhaps a little bit kinky?
Yes, quite.
Then buy one of our B&D t-shirts at Teespring. Teespring.com/stores/postmortem-studios. You want to be cool, don't you?
Does the word duh mean anything to you?
Sure, you could play one of those hoity-toity horror games where the most horrifying thing that happens is someone wearing a corset who really shouldn't. Or you could grind a zombie's face into a belt sander.
Postmortem Studios sells a wide variety of stock art, well over 500 pieces, many of them by RPG industry veteran Brad McDevitt. These are available for you to use in your personal or professional projects, whether stories or games or anything else. Check us out at rpgnow.com.
In his house in R'lyeh, great Cthulhu lies dreaming, and when he awakens, he shall have the morning wood of aeons. Call of Cthulhu is a deeply pornographic card game. Enjoy your tentacles.
Tull. Right, no post yet. So as well as being up incredibly late, streaming on Inappropriate Characters with Pundit and Venger last night, we've been out of heating oil for days. So I've also spent a lot of this morning bleeding the oil through to get the boiler working again, so everything smells of kerosene. Hard to believe people huff petrol and things to get high. Come on, there's more people than new out there. Speak up. And then go and add money to the Zelart Scholarship. How do you pronounce your last name? Because I always trip up on that, and it's such a common name. If can spell it out phonetically, that would be helpful. I don't know why I bother with Gab. Just got followed by right-wing furries. What else can we talk about? SLA Industries. It's not really a different edition, but this is the hardcover updated artwork edition. Still bumbling along. I was line developer for this at one point. Not that anything happened on my watch because there was no money to do anything. Dave used to live with a friend of mine, a business partner of mine, so we talked about SLA a lot. I wrote a few things for it. Sicarian, Cannibal Sector 1. Kind of had things going a little bit again, and then the bottom fell out of all that again. It's a game that a lot of people really love and care about, but the release schedule is not the best. And they've been working on a skirmish game for it called, again, Cannibal Sector 1, not confusing at all, for a while. The miniatures look interesting. I don't think it's out or even remotely close to out yet, but they keep their cards close to their chest. But I hope it does well for them. I had a bit of a falling out with one of the guys who worked on it, Jared Earl, during Gamergate. The usual thing. Had heard the wrong kind of thing and wasn't prepared to listen to anyone else's point of view, no matter how many facts or whatever else were brought up. So that probably means I'm never going to end up working on any of that ever again. I don't regret it, because I think I did the right thing in backing Gamergate, and I care about what the right thing is, which a lot of people don't, and you've got to be able to live with yourself at the end of the day. There is something about the gaming industry that is unpleasant, I think. And this was true of the role-playing industry even before, you know, anything else, before it spread into computer games and so on. In that, especially if you're a small indie publisher, you are your brand, and your brand is you. And what you intend by whatever you've written, whatever you've done, doesn't matter. It's other people's interpretation of what you've said and what you've done that matters. I was looking around for some reviews and stuff the other day. Contrary to popular belief, I don't make a regular habit out of Googling myself. And I stumbled on some people talking about Dai Kaiju Dai, which I... quick fate game that I put together for Mecha versus Kaiju combat. And some of the accusations that people make, because I'm not around to dispute them, are just peculiar, like that I steal art and so on, because I used pieces of art from other things in a blog post. Somehow that translates to stealing art professionally. People are weird, man. And there's really nothing you can do about it if you're contentious and rambunctious, as I prefer to be. But yeah, if you want to make more sales, you've got to somehow thread that needle of not offending either side. Somehow. I don't know how you would manage that, but there you go. Yeah, it's like Cyberpunk, but it's a much more fantastical, science fiction-y world. It's usually, most of your play, 99% of it takes place in a single city on a single planet. There aren't cybernetics, there's bio implants, so it's a bit ahead of itself there. And it's a hyper-capitalist, predatory society, clearly taking some inspiration from the ravages of Thatcher's England on Scotland and other parts of the world. And I think that reach of imagination and looking beyond what were the trends at the time and being grounded in something real is what's given it its longevity. System's not fantastic, but it does the job, and nothing else quite works with it. People have done conversions, and weirdly some people have converted other games to the SLA system. But there's just, I don't know, there's one of those ineffable somethings about it that make it good, and I think that's also true in the fantasy realm with Dragon Warriors, which was a somewhat obscure British tabletop D&D style game. But it was so rooted in medievalism and British folklore that it gave it something extra, something special, I think. Who is blooping me? Oh, it's Discord. I should probably shut that for now. Don't want to get interrupted too much. I'm no good at this blathering on. I hate kind of speaking into an empty thing with no particular subject. Fate. That's an interesting thing. It's so much happened because of the open source movement coming to RPGs with D&D 3rd edition. All these other games piled on top. Technically, Fate in the form of Fudge pre-existed before that. So that was an earlier open source system, but it took the weight of D&D to make it take off and to take off for other games. But the newest one, Fate Core, I don't think is as good as the previous edition or some of the other implementations that have been done. Forks, if you will. Things like Starblazer, Legends of Anglaire and so on. Those are much better implementations of Fate than the new Fate Core, I think. I think it has had its time as the kind of darling, and is fading away again now. So, Evil Hat may be on the way out. I'm given to understand they're in some financial difficulties. $30 short now. Okay, let's have a quick look. Yep, $30 left to go. Now, I normally charge $20 an hour for consultation, so take advantage. Is there anything anyone wants to know about the RPG industry, or publishing, or writing, or working for yourself, or any of that kind of stuff? Excuse me. I could talk about art, I suppose, since that's kind of the topic. Hint, hint, donate to the Zelart Scholarship. RPGs, especially independent RPGs, are produced on a shoestring or as a sideline hobby for most people who are involved. So one way or another, you're either saving money or you're not expecting to make much in the way of money. If you do like a small indie RPG, don't really put too much effort into marketing it or whatever, you can probably expect with no effort to sell about 50 copies. So say you 50 copies of a 100-page book retailing at about $10 each. It's $500. You instantly lose a third of that to middlemen like RPG Now or Drive Through. So, you know, if you were just going to break even, you'd have a budget of $300 to put the whole thing together. Assuming you write it yourself, yeah, that's not going to cost you. Editing, can't really afford editing at that scale. So you've got maybe $300 to play around with as art budget. And art prices in the indie RPG industry haven't really changed since 2000, which isn't good. So you're looking at, so say black and white, okay, $100, $50, $25, double that for colour, right? That's base rate for someone who doesn't have a lot of experience or whatever. So you could maybe get a colour cover and nothing else. There is a lot of stock art out there, but most of the good pieces see a lot of reuse. Brad McDevitt, who works with me a lot, he produces a shit ton of stock art which we sell. The Zelart Scholarship produces stock art which we sell to support that in the following year. So you can get hold of art relatively cheaply, but everything eats into your budget. And the good stuff gets used over and over and over and over again. So, yeah, I do make an effort to sell my games, and there is the long tail model, so you can probably anticipate spending what seems to be your maximum budget, and then anything after that is profit. Kickstarter and so on's helped a lot as well. But you have to find ways to cut corners and to get art cheaply. So there's a few ways you can do that. You can order everything from the same artist. They will often give you a discount on that basis. So that could be useful. The trouble with that is you then have all your eggs in one basket. If they get ill or have an accident or, you know, life happens like it does, then you have no backup. So that can be a big problem. You can hire new people, so students, hobbyists. Quality is going to be incredibly variable there, and you may not be able to use them more than once, because after they work for you, they get more confident, they understand that they can charge more, they can find other people to work for. It is rewarding to help young people succeed in the fantasy art field. You know, that's why I do this, right? And while the original reason that I worked with students and so on was budgetary, it has felt incredibly rewarding to help them through school, to make a real difference with a relatively small amount of money to people's lives, to give them confidence, practice. Work experience is invaluable to people. It's so hard to get experience, and you get in that trap between you can't get work without experience, you can't get experience without work. So, you know, if you take a chance on someone, yeah, that's good. And yeah, they work cheaper. I'm not going to shy away from that. That's a big reason why you should work with them. Yep, almost there. If you look at commissions open on Twitter, that's another good place to find new talent. DeviantArt as well. Weirdly, a bunch of the hentai drawing boards and things, there's some really talented artists on there for whom it's primarily a hobby and they don't charge too much. Convincing them not to be quite so lewd for a project can be a bit trickier, but yeah. Crowdfunding has been useful. Can give you more of a budget because you can get your payments up front. But it's very easy for crowdfunded projects to run away from you, to produce too much money too quickly and cause you to overpromise what you can produce. So you have to be careful, you have to rein that in. And the more time passes, the more irate and upset people get as well.
So I'm not 7 years late like some people, but Tales of Gore was late because I was waiting on the artist, because it was all going to be from the same artist. And like I said earlier, that makes you kind of vulnerable to any hiccups. And we had hiccups. We had many hiccups. Most of them weren't his fault. And I'd always wanted to work with Michael Manning since I first saw his work. But yeah, it was just a bad time, and even genuine excuses start to wear thin. So I'd be a little careful using crowdfunding for projects. Certainly, places like Kickstarter have become more censorious. Indiegogo has as well, but to a lesser extent. That's largely why I use them, just for a little bit of extra insurance. Yeah, it is tough. And thank you for the compliment about the Gamergate book. I wish more people would read it. I did all I could. And at least there's a record out there. So that's something. Editing. I can talk about editing. Right, like I said, games are done on a shoestring. When you pay a writer, you need to be paying at least 2 cents a word, really. That is pathetic in terms of any writing rates in any other industry, but that's probably about all you can afford if you're doing an independent game production, and that leaves you no money for editing. The best businesses in the RPG industry were only paying 6 cents a word when I was working for them. And that's three times as much as you might get working for another indie publisher. But that's still pathetic by the standards of any other industry. Copywriting, anything like that, 6 cents a word is nothing. It may have gone up a bit, it may have not, but yeah, it's not the best sort of levels of amount. So again, that puts a squeeze on you. You can get away with not hiring an editor to an extent, but you're always blind to your own mistakes, your own issues, the common spelling errors or grammatical errors that you make. So, if nothing else, you need to at least get someone else to read your manuscript. Other things you can do, Grammarly is actually a really good tool. Worth paying for once you've got some income coming in. There's a free version that's okay, but you really need the more powerful tools to really get anywhere with it. Why won't the volume stay off on this thing? And the other thing you can do is... There we go. The other thing you can do is you can get text-to-speech software and get that to read through your manuscript to you, and that it won't perfect your grammar, but it really improves the readability. You can hear the cadence of the machine reading it, and that can help you figure out maybe where you've got the punctuation wrong or whatever else. So those are all low-cost or relatively low-cost ways you can get around having to hire an editor. But if you can afford an editor, you probably should. But it's always a gamble. Everything's a gamble, and margins are so thin that it's a problem. And that's part of the reason I've set up my own sales point now. I got sick of over a third of my sales being taken off me. So hopefully I can grow traffic to the site. And if anyone out there produces RPG material that's maybe a little bit edgy or comedic or horror or sci-fi oriented, that sort of thing, I'm hoping to provide a sales point for other people that's a little bit more insulated from censorship than some of these other places are. I mean, at the end of the day, payment processes and so on are still where the problem lies. That's a vulnerability that goes across everything. And there's nothing you can really do about that, but at least I won't censor your product just because someone got their panties in a bunch. We are $1 short, ladles and jelly spoons.
$1 short. Who's gonna chip in? Go on. So it wouldn't hurt going over the goal, of course. I was supposed to go on game school this weekend, but stuff's come up. Doing demo of Tales of Gore, but yeah, that's not going to happen. We're going to have to reschedule that, but I'll let people know when that's going to happen. That would be cool, man, behind the screen. $1 could get me there. And then I could go and have a nap or something until later, because I am wrecked. Not enough sleep over the weekend. Health stuff. And then the stream last night and dealing with the boiler this morning. But I thought I'd force myself to do something that passes for work. It always scares me when I think about exactly how long I've been doing this stuff. When I was still at secondary school, I think I would have been 13, 14. That was the first time I made a game that I charged money for. A friend paid me £10 to design a game for him. It was based on the old Captain Future show. So that was the first money I ever earned. Then I did like a fanzine, which had some RPG material in it. That was called Hardware. And I did one issue of Brass Stud, which was for an online Blood Bowl, not online, Play by Post. See, that dates it. Blood Bowl knockoff. Yeah. Any newer thoughts on the porn ban in the UK, since you mentioned how donation and sales platforms are getting more strict? It's just so weird. This unholy alliance between sort of conventional, traditionalist conservatives who regard all this as problematic, and like, I don't know, unchristian or whatever else, working, let's say, much the same thing with a slightly different spin to these sex negative feminists and so on, like Gail Dines, who've helped create this legislation and push for it. It's like trying to push the genie back in the bottle, as far as porn in the UK went. I mean, so when I was young, growing up, until the internet really took off, about 95 or so, when it really started getting to the point where everyone had email and web access. Before that, it was all banned. There was no way to get it unless someone's dad had snuck in some filthy stuff from Europe. Oh, thank you for helping us get the goal. Maybe some more people will chip in and take us over. But the focus now is finding people to enter. So if you know any young genre artists who do sci-fi, fantasy, horror, whatever, if you know any, if they're in school or in their reduced circumstances, so disabled or unemployed or whatever, hit them up, tell them to enter. I'll do something more about that tomorrow and maybe tonight. But yeah, what was I talking about? Porn. Yeah, so the internet kind of blew the doors off that kind of censorship. There was no way they could really control it, so they stopped trying, and relaxed everything. And now they're trying to constrict it again because I guess the censorship technology that places like China and Singapore and other places are using has kind of caught up. Of course, there's VPNs and so on, and anonymizing websites and so on that people are going to use to get around it. So it's just... it's like the DRM issue, yeah? So you get DRM on a product. It doesn't deter piracy or whatever at all, really. They all will find a way around it, and they do. All it does is it inconveniences your end user, who can only install it on maybe 1 or 2 machines, or has to juggle loads of passwords, or it has to always be online, or whatever it is. And in the same way, all this is going to do is punish a whole lot of people who just aren't tech savvy. And why should they suffer? And why should the UK porn industry suffer to this degree? Because most of the people being put out of work, let's face it, are women. And a lot of those are directors, not stars. It's a lot of niche fetish stuff that has been most affected. It's a lot of feminist porn producers that have been affected. It's just so regressive. It's a huge step backwards, and it's hard for me to understand how and why these two different forces have come together to push it. It's not going to be enforceable in any meaningful way, so who knows? I mean, but it's happening everywhere, isn't it? Tumblr has banned it. Shout out to people still posting porn on Tumblr. You're the real heroes. And that's affected marginalised people, people looking for their sexual identities and so on. And people are just going to post it on Twitter. And that was more about Apple, but... walled gardens are boring. Let me run through the fields naked. But, yeah, it happens everywhere. Gaming. You know, Steam backward and forwarding on censorship and adult games and visual novels and all that, and PlayStation tightening up their restrictions on that sort of material, while weirdly Nintendo's gone a bit the other way. It's nobody's business, really, provided you've got some reasonable safeguard so kids don't see something they shouldn't. I don't see that it's anybody's business at all. And the same things happened with things like my Gamergate card game, which you can get on my site now, post-mort.com, for download and print to play. You know, things like that getting censored, or one of Venja Satanis's books getting censored because it obliquely mentioned rape-ish on one page out of however many. It's just... News says, I think at least doing something to block porn to enforce unnecessary law is better than doing nothing just because it's tricky. Porn is massively detrimental to the development of children. I don't know that it is, but let's assume that it is. This would be one of those things that's the responsibility of the parents, and there's already nanny software and so on. There were a lot more kind of softly ways they could have gone about enforcing this, and they kind of did up to a point. There was a change that required you to opt in to be able to see adult content that went through, and many providers will now provide net nanny software, things like that. For me, it's the parents' job. Kids are still going to see stuff anyway. Whether it's porn mags they find hidden in a bush on the old train line like we used to, or whether it's a pop-up or a dodgy website or whatever else. Just have frank conversations about it. That seems to me to be the best way. They just seem to be afraid of any difficult conversations about anything, and that leaks into our fiction and so on as well. It's not helpful. You know, I'm glad I've got my own sales point now, so I can put out my riskier stuff eventually once things settle down a bit. But shouldn't have to. I think most pornographers would say, yeah, we want to be careful. What's really fucked about the situation here in the UK is that this consultation was done with MindGeek, who own Pornhub. So we've essentially gone to a site that already rips off a whole bunch of other studios and so on, and owns the majority of the American porn industry, and asked them to implement a system that's going to end up paying them a lot of money off the back of government mandate. It's just it's unbelievably screwed, man. After Brexit, I think the approach to adult material on the net is the thing that baffles me the most, and it's not just adult content. Imagine, if you will, a pornography store with open doors and no checks to make sure children don't just wander in. It wouldn't happen, so why is it okay just because it's online? I think because of the in-person factor there. It's not just a matter of indulging your curiosity by doing a Google search or whatever else it might be. There would be the interaction with other people there, and people would unfairly think that maybe they're predators or whatever that hang out in sex shops. Not that the shops really exist that much anymore. It's all moved online anyway, so... Boy, we are well off topic. I guess censorship is just one of those things that transcends, borders. Right. I think I'm going to saunter off and have a nap because I've had no sleep and been very busy. I may pick this up later tonight, so keep an eye out and let people know. And if anyone wants to donate, igg.me/@ that's AT, not the squiggle, /Zelart 2018. Top up, let other people know, and let people know to enter, please. So I need people to help with this. This is the whole reason of doing it. Right, I shall see you later, hopefully with smaller bags under my eyes. Zang.
Thank you.